My name is Catherine. I'm 60 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you look at your own family. 3 days ago, my son Caleb and my daughter-in-law Melissa pushed my husband, Edward, and me off a cliff more than 100 feet high during a family hike in the mountains of Colorado. Lying broken at the bottom of that ravine, blood running down my face, I heard Edward's faint voice whisper, "Catherine, don't move. Pretend you're dead." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when Edward revealed a horrifying truth, a secret our children had hidden for 25 years. For 4 decades, Edward and I had built what we believed was a perfect family. We lived in a small house in Boulder, Colorado, where every morning the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen and blended with the sound of birds singing on the porch. I was an elementary school teacher, and Edward owned a small woodworking shop behind the house where he turned plain pieces of wood into beautiful furniture. We had 2 sons, John, the oldest, and Caleb, 5 years younger. John was the soul of the family, cheerful, kind, always helping his father in the shop. Caleb was quieter, more reserved, but I loved him deeply, believing he was simply shy. On Sunday afternoons after church, our family gathered around the oak table Edward had built by hand. John talked about his dream of becoming an engineer, while Caleb sat silently, tapping his fork against his plate. Later, Edward and I would walk along the pine trail near our home, talking about our dreams, peaceful old age, watching our grandchildren grow, long road trips after retirement. I never imagined those walks would one day lead us straight into tragedy. On weekends, I often hosted family dinners. My sister Beatrice, her husband, and their kids would come over, bringing her homemade apple pie. The house would fill with laughter and the dang my fair smell of baked apples. Edward fixed things in the yard while Beatrice and I cooked in the kitchen. After 40 years of marriage, Edward still brought me wildflowers on his way home, and I still graded my students' papers beside him as he worked with wood. We were partners in every sense or so, I thought. Everything began to change when John turned 20. The brothers argued more often, and I started hearing tense, half-finished conversations between them in the hallway. Whenever I walked in, they fell silent. Edward said it was just brother stuff, that it would pass. And I believed him, because I needed to believe. Then one October night, exactly 25 years ago, John didn't come home for dinner. We waited until midnight. Caleb said he was studying in his room, but I remember the strange look in his eyes whenever I mentioned his brother, cold, distant. The next morning, Edward and some neighbors went searching. They found John's body at the bottom of a cliff near a small river in the woods. The police ruled it an accident. I never questioned it because I couldn't bear to imagine anything worse. John's funeral was the darkest day of my life. Caleb was disturbingly calm, not shedding a single tear. Edward held my hand, comforting me while secretly carrying a truth that would haunt us decades later. After John's death, Caleb changed. He became thoughtful, attentive, as if trying to fill the emptiness his brother left behind. I believed he was healing, but it was only a mask. Years passed. Caleb married Melissa, a charming woman from a nearby town. They had 2 beautiful children, Emily and Ryan. Life seemed peaceful again. Melissa called me Mom, helped around the house, brought over cookies. Edward was happy, believing we had a loving, complete family, until 6 months ago, when the real nightmare began. Edward and I decided to update our will. After a lifetime of work, we had our home, a few plots of land near Colorado Springs, and nearly $1 million in savings. It was Caleb who made the suggestion. "Mom, Dad, you're getting older. It's time to get everything settled." Melissa sat beside me, holding my hand, her voice sweet as honey. "We just want you 2 to be safe. We love you so much." That trust almost killed me. Our attorney, Mr. Michael Grant, who'd known our family for years, explained all the options. But Caleb insisted we name him and Melissa as our only heirs, promising they'd share everything equally with the kids later. "Mom, Dad," he said softly, "you'll need us someday. It's better if we handle the finances now, so we can take good care of you." His words sounded kind, but now I can hear the cold calculation behind them. And Edward seemed convinced. My husband, Edward, who had always been the more practical one, agreed without much hesitation. I, however, still had my doubts, especially when I remembered John, our eldest son, once promising that he would take care of us when we got old. John had dreams, a kind heart, but he was gone now. Caleb was the only child we had left. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in Michael Grant's law office. I still remember it clearly. Melissa wore a modest floral dress, hugged me tightly after signing, and whispered in my ear, "Now we're officially one family forever, Mom." Her words made me shiver, though I couldn't explain why. Caleb shook his father's hand and smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. That night, while preparing dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. The following weeks were strange. Caleb and Melissa began visiting us more often, but those visits no longer felt like family time. Instead, they came with suggestions, wrapped in the guise of care, renovating the house, investing our savings, or buying more life insurance. "Mom, Dad, you really should think about selling this big old house and moving somewhere smaller," Melissa said sweetly, her eyes scanning every piece of furniture as if she were appraising it. "We could help you find a nice apartment downtown. It'd be easier for us to take care of you." But I loved our home in Boulder. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, Edward's workshop, and the garden where our grandkids once played in the sunshine. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. When I said that, I caught a flash of cold irritation in Caleb's eyes. "Mom, you and Dad are being unreasonable," he said, in a tone I'd never heard from him before. "This house is way too big for two people. If something happened, like a fall down the stairs or a slip in the kitchen, we might not get here in time." Melissa immediately chimed in, her voice sugary but sharp. "Plus, the upkeep must be expensive, Mom. Selling now would be a smart move, the market's great. You should really think about a place that fits your age." Edward began to consider it. My husband, always the realist, seemed convinced by their logic. But I couldn't shake the feeling that their concern wasn't genuine. One night, after another tense conversation, I asked Edward, "Don't you think it's strange how suddenly Caleb cares so much about our finances?" "Catherine, he's just worried about us," Edward said while brushing his teeth in the bathroom. "Maybe we should listen to him. We're not young anymore." I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. Now I understand Edward had started to sense something was wrong too. Things got worse when Caleb suggested we give him power of attorney over our finances. "It's just a precaution," he explained, while Melissa calmly made tea in my kitchen as if it were her own. "If something happened to either of we could handle the paperwork without any legal hassle." He sounded so natural, so reasonable, almost convincing. But the smooth insistence in his tone left me deeply uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay, staring at the ceiling, listening to Edward's steady breathing beside me, trying to understand why I felt so disturbed. The next morning, I called my sister Beatrice for advice. Beatrice had always been sharper than me, skeptical by nature. When I told her how Caleb was pressuring us, she was silent for a long time before saying, "Kathy, don't you find it odd that Caleb's in such a rush to control your money? He has his own job, his own life. Why would he need to manage yours?" Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. She was right. Caleb had never struggled financially, never asked us for help. So why was he suddenly so desperate for control? That afternoon, when Caleb came over again to talk about the future, I decided to confront him directly. "Caleb," I said, as we sat together in the living room, "why do you want to manage your parents' finances? Your father and I are still perfectly capable." Its reaction was so quick, it made my skin crawl, its face went stiff, and in those eyes, I saw something cold and dangerous. "Mom, this isn't control," he said tensely. "This is love and family responsibility." But when he said responsibility, it sounded more like a threat disguised as filial duty. Melissa, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke, her voice soft but cutting. "It breaks our hearts to see you both worrying about things we could handle so easily." That night, after they left, Edward and I had our first serious argument in years. He said I was being paranoid, imagining problems that didn't exist, but I insisted that Caleb had changed, that something was very wrong. "Edward," I said, as we washed the bold dishes, "do you remember what Caleb was like before John died? He was different, colder, distant. Something about him always scared me." He looked at me for a long time before whispering, "Catherine, there are things about John's death I never told you." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "What do you mean about John's death?" I asked, my voice trembling. Edward sat down on the old wooden chair where we'd shared thousands of meals, the same place where John used to do his homework and Caleb used to sit quietly. He covered his face with his hands, as if trying to wipe away the memories that had haunted him for 25 years. "The night John died," he began, his voice breaking. "Caleb wasn't in his room studying like he said. I followed him, because he'd been acting strange for days, angry, restless, like he was hiding something." He paused, staring at his hands as if the truth he'd hidden for so long was carved into them. "I saw the two of them arguing near the cliff, Catherine. I heard them shouting words I'll never forget. The world around me collapsed. What were they fighting about?" I whispered, terrified of the answer I already knew. Edward lifted his head, tears streaming down his face, tears I hadn't even seen at John's funeral. "About the inheritance," he said quietly. "Caleb was furious that John, as the eldest, would get the majority of the estate by law and family tradition. But there was something else. About money. About a withdrawal John had discovered." "What withdrawal?" I asked, feeling the ground beneath me crumble. Edward took a deep breath, his voice heavy. 3 days before he died, John came to my workshop. He said he'd found out Caleb had been secretly taking money from the family savings account. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. John had proof. He'd been investigating for months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And Fescue, my youngest son, the one I'd always thought was kind, attentive, and devoted after his brother's death, had been betraying us long before that. "Why didn't you tell me?" I screamed, my voice cracking through the tears. "Because by the time I got there, it was already too late." Edward choked. I saw Caleb standing next to John's body. He was shaking, crying, repeating over and over, "It was an accident, Dad, just an accident." He looked at me with desperate eyes and begged, "I didn't mean to." You believed him?" "Because he was still my son. John was gone. I couldn't lose the other one too. I wanted to believe it was an accident. I needed to." "And what about the stolen money?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. He swore it would never happen again, and I believed him. Edward's voice broke. "Dear God, I believed him, Catherine, because I couldn't bear to think my son was a murderer." I staggered to my feet, gripping the wall to keep from collapsing. Everything I had ever believed about my family, about the son I had loved for 25 years, had been a lie. "And did he ever pay the money back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Never," Edward replied, his voice low and filled with despair. "He kept taking more. Small amounts I pretended not to notice. Because if I confronted him, I'd have to admit that I'd been covering for a murderer. Every time I stayed silent, I became more of an accomplice. My head spun. The horrifying truth unfolded, piece by piece, sharp, clear, merciless. So, that's why he wants control of our finances, I whispered. Not out of love or concern, but to finish what he started 25 years ago. Edward nodded, his eyes clouded with regret. There's something else, Catherine. Something I only found out a few weeks ago. Worse than this? I asked, feeling like my heart was about to explode from the shocks piling up. Edward walked to his desk and pulled out a few papers hidden beneath a pile of folders. I hired someone to investigate Caleb's finances. His woodworking business isn't successful like he claims. In fact, he's on the edge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $400,000 to banks and suppliers. My hands trembled as I read the cold numbers on the page. Caleb wasn't the successful, devoted man I had believed him to be. He was a failure, desperate, living on lies and stolen money. Does Melissa know about this? I asked, remembering her fake hugs and gentle smiles. She absolutely does, Edward said. I've noticed the way she steers every conversation toward money, the way she asks detailed questions about our savings accounts, the house's value, our life insurance. Those aren't innocent questions, Catherine. Those are the questions of someone calculating how much our deaths are worth. The blood in my veins froze. I looked at my husband, my lips trembling. Our deaths? For the first time, I truly considered it that Caleb might want to kill us. Until then, I had only thought he wanted the money, the inheritance. But if he had killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents? Edward, I said, clutching his hand. We have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about John and about what's happening now. But Edward shook his head, his eyes red. Where's the proof, Catherine? I'm an accomplice. I've hidden a murder for 25 years. If I confess, they'll arrest me. Who would believe a 65-year-old man saying he stayed silent for more than 2 decades? I stood frozen, tears streaming down my face. At that moment, I realized the nightmare from 25 years ago had never ended. It was starting all over again, and this time, we were the next victims. He was right, and that made me more hopeless than ever. We were trapped in a web of lies we had woven ourselves. So what do we do now? I asked, panicking. Just wait for him to kill us like he killed John? Edward tried to stay calm, though his hands were trembling. We'll be careful. We have to protect ourselves. Gather evidence before it's too late. He didn't finish his sentence. The phone rang. It was Caleb. Hi, Mom. His voice was sweet enough to make my skin crawl. Melissa and I thought it'd be wonderful to do something special for your 40th wedding anniversary. This weekend, we'd love to take you and Dad hiking in Colorado, that spot you always said you wanted to visit. We'll take pictures, have a picnic, spend a beautiful day together. My blood turned to ice. I looked at Edward. He'd heard it all, and his face mirrored my fear exactly. That sounds lovely, son, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Let us think about it and call you back. When I hung up, we just stared at each other in silence. We both knew what this was. An invitation to our own execution. Hiking, I whispered. He's going to take us up there to kill us, then make it look like an accident. Edward nodded, his face heavy. The same look he'd worn the night John fell from the cliff. That night, neither of us slept a single minute. We lay in the dark, holding each other, planning how to survive our own child. The following days were a nightmare of place, fear, and pretending. We had to act smiling, appearing cheerful whenever Caleb and Melissa came to visit, listening to them excitedly talk about the special family trip. But inside, every cell in my body screamed in terror. I knew I was looking straight into the eyes of the people who had killed my firstborn and now planned to do the same to me. One Wednesday afternoon, Melissa showed up with shopping bags and a radiant smile, the smile of a devil, wrapped in angelic charm. "Dear Catherine," she said, hugging me with the same arms that would soon try to push me off a cliff. "I've packed everything for our hike: cookies, water, fruit, everything for a perfect picnic." She opened the bag and proudly displayed each item like an innocent child. But all I could think was, every single one of those things could be used to cover up a murder. "And I brought my new camera," she added, holding up an expensive Canon. "I want to capture every moment of this special day photos we'll cherish forever." Her words made me sick. Those cherished photos, if they ever existed, would only show our bodies at the bottom of a canyon if anyone ever found them. Caleb walked in right after her, a brand new hiking backpack slung over his shoulder. "Dad," he said with forced enthusiasm, "I got everything we need for a safe trip: ropes, harnesses, flashlights, even a first aid kit." Every word hit me like ice: safety gear for the perfect murder. Cruelty disguised as care made my head spin. "Isn't this a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, forcing a calm tone, hoping to find an excuse to cancel the trip. Melissa stroked my cheek gently, with a tenderness that made my stomach twist. "That's why we picked an easy, safe trail," she said. "Even kids could handle it. And besides, Caleb and I will be right there to take care of you both the whole way." Yes, they would take care of us, until the moment they decided to push us over the edge. That night, after they left, Edward and I sat in the living room trembling not from the cold, but from the suffocating fear that had gripped us for hours. "We can't go," I said, gripping his hand tightly. "We just can't. We have to find a way to say no." Edward shook his head heavily. "If we refuse, they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe a house fire or a staged robbery. At least on the mountain, we'll know what they're planning." His reasoning made sense, but it brought no comfort. "So what do you plan to do?" I asked, almost desperate. Edward was silent for a while before replying. "We'll go, but we'll be ready. I'll hide a phone and keep it recording. If we survive, we'll have evidence. And if we don't," his voice broke, "at least someone will know the truth." That Friday evening, neither of us could eat dinner. We both knew it might be our last meal in this kitchen, once filled with laughter and love, now heavy with dread. Edward checked our will again, making sure that if something happened, Caleb wouldn't get everything without raising suspicion. "It's for Beatrice. In it, I explained everything: John's death, and the plan I believe Caleb is preparing. I've hidden it in the file cabinet. If we don't come back," he whispered, "at least she'll know where to look for the truth." That night, we lay in each other's arms, whispering what might be our final words of love. "If something happens," Edward murmured, "remember that 40 years with you has been the greatest blessing of my life. Despite my mistakes, my secrets, I love you more than I love myself." I cried quietly, memorizing his warmth, his scent, the rhythm of his heartbeat as if engraving them onto my soul. On Saturday morning, the Colorado sky was cruelly clear and blue, as if mocking our fear. Caleb arrived early, whistling as he walked into the house. "Good morning, lovebirds, celebrating 40 years," he shouted cheerfully, his tone chilling. "Ready for the big adventure?" Behind him, Melissa walked in, glowing like a bride, except this was a wedding with death itself. During breakfast, which we could barely touch, Caleb spread a map across the table, pointing out each section of the route. "This trail is absolutely beautiful," he said. "It leads to a lookout point where you can see the entire valley. People say the view up there is breathtaking." His eyes lit up, but it wasn't joy I saw. It was the gleam of evil. Of course, the scenery would be beautiful, Because it would be the last thing we ever saw. There are a few steep spots, Melissa added sweetly, her voice dripping with honey. But with your experience, it should be no problem. I almost laughed bitterly. Two people in their 60s who barely manage neighborhood walks, and she called that experience. As we loaded the car, I saw Caleb carefully checking his backpack. Inside were ropes, a small shovel, and something that looked like a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the gun. "For safety," he said, with terrifying casualness. "If we get lost or run into trouble, we can fire a signal." Of course, they would fire a signal after pushing us over the cliff, so people would find the bodies and believe it was just a tragic family hiking accident. Everything had been meticulously planned, every little detail perfected for a murder disguised as misfortune. The drive up the mountain took more than 2 hours, but to me, it felt like a one-way trip with no return. Melissa played country music, singing along as if everything were perfectly normal. Caleb drove carefully, never speeding, stopping at every sign. He didn't want any accidents before his perfect plan played out. The whole ride, Edward held my hand tightly. Quietly, he turned on the voice recorder on his phone and slipped it into his jacket pocket. From that moment, every word, every move they made was being recorded. If we survived, it would be proof. And if we didn't, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we reached the trailhead, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The scenery was stunning: green pines, crisp mountain air, the faint sound of a stream in the distance. But to me, this wasn't nature. It was an execution ground. Caleb and Melissa grabbed their backpacks, smiling brightly, as if this were some dream vacation. "Ready?" Caleb asked, his excitement clearly fake. And for the first time in 25 years, I saw in his eyes the same cold glint I had seen the night John died at the cliff. The trail began gently, winding through trees and moss-covered rocks, but I knew the farther we walked, the closer we came to death. Melissa led the way, taking pictures and gushing over the scenery. "Look at these wildflowers," she exclaimed. "And that bird over there, it's gorgeous." Her performance was flawless, the perfect image of a loving daughter-in-law enjoying a day out with her in-laws. But behind that smile, I saw pure calculation. Caleb walked behind us, pretending to make sure Mom and Dad don't fall behind. But I could feel his gaze sharp as knives stabbing into my back. Every time I turned, he smiled that same practiced, deceitful smile he'd worn for 25 years. "You guys doing okay?" he asked with fake concern. "Want to take a quick break?" After nearly an hour of climbing, the path grew steeper. My legs were heavy, and Edward's breathing grew more labored. We were old, and they knew it. They'd chosen this trail to wear us down, to make us weak, easy prey. "Just a little farther to the viewpoint," Melissa called, out, cheerfully. But I knew she was lying. According to the map I'd studied at home, there was still at least another hour to go. That could only mean one thing. They weren't taking us to any real viewpoint. The place they planned to kill us had to be much closer. All along the way, I tried to memorize every detail: which trees, which rocks, which turns, anything that might help the police if I survived. Edward was doing the same. Every now and then, our eyes met, filled with fear, but also with determination. We both knew we were walking toward death, but we also knew this might be our only chance to expose the truth. "Look over there!" Melissa suddenly shouted, pointing to a tall, rocky ledge to the right. "From up there, you can see the entire valley. Why don't we climb up and take a few photos to remember the day?" The blood in my veins froze. I knew that was the spot where they planned to kill us. The cliff rose about 100 feet above the main trail, reached by a narrow path covered in loose gravel and slippery tree roots. The wind was strong, and there wasn't a single sturdy tree to grab onto if someone slipped. Below was a deep ravine filled with jagged rocks, gaping like the mouth of death itself. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This path looks dangerous for people our age." But Caleb had already started climbing, his backpack full of safety gear. "Come on, Mom," he said sweetly, in that same tone he used as a child whenever he wanted something. "It'll only take a few minutes. And besides, Melissa's right, the photo from up there will be beautiful." The way he said beautiful sent chills down my spine. Yes, the photos would be beautiful evidence of our deaths. Edward squeezed my hand, his eyes reminding me that his phone was still recording. We had to keep going. We had to see this through and capture everything. If we stopped now, they'd find another place, another time, to finish the job. The climb up the ledge was terrifying. Loose stones shifted beneath our feet, and I nearly fell several times. Every step echoed with the crunch of gravel, sharp and cold. But the most horrifying part was how perfect this spot was for murder. One gentle push, that's all it would take, and the victim would fall to the bottom, never to be questioned again. No witnesses, no suspicion, no justice. Melissa shouted from above, climbing quickly as if she'd done it many times before. Caleb followed behind her, then turned back to offer his hand to Edward and me at the steepest part. His palm gripped my arm cold, slick with sweat, like the talons of a vulture. From the top, the view truly was breathtaking. The valley stretched endlessly below, deep green mountains in the distance, and a silver river winding through like a ribbon of light. In another world, it could have been a happy family moment. But for me, it was the view of hell. "Come on, let's take a picture," Melissa called, standing dangerously close to the edge, her cheerful tone masking pure evil. "I want the whole valley behind you." Edward and I stepped closer, one cautious step at a time, each one bringing us closer to our fate. I saw Caleb behind us, his eyes darting, measuring the angle, adjusting his stance, calculating the perfect push. "Perfect," Melissa chirped, raising her camera. "Now, put your arms around each other and smile." Edward wrapped his arm around me, maybe for the last time. She clicked the camera over and over, each flash bursting like lightning before a storm. "Let me take one more," Caleb said, stepping closer. "But you two should move back a little so the background looks clearer." One step back, that meant standing right on the cliff's edge. I looked at Edward. We both knew the moment had come. We stepped back. The ground beneath us began to crumble, the wind roaring in our ears, the solid earth giving way to nothingness. Melissa raised her camera again, and this time I saw it clearly. The pretense was gone. The mask of sweetness had fallen away. "Smile," she said coldly. "This will be your last picture." In that instant, Caleb lunged forward, arms outstretched. His plan was simple: push us over, snap a few accident photos, then go down to discover the bodies. But Edward was ready for this moment. In one swift motion, he grabbed Caleb's wrist and yanked him forward. "If we have to die," he shouted, his voice echoing through the canyon, "then you're coming with us." In that horrifying instant, all four of us teetered on the edge, clutching one another in a grotesque dance between life and death. Melissa screamed, trying to pull Caleb back, but the combined weight of all four of us made the ground collapse beneath our feet. I felt the exact moment when gravity won. All four of us fell together, sucked into a deadly spiral. The wind roared past my ears, and the ground rushed up like a giant blade. I screamed, but the sound vanished into the void. In those final seconds, I could only think of John, what he must have felt 25 years ago when Caleb pushed him off the cliff. The impact was horrifying. I heard the sickening crack of bones breaking, flesh slamming against rock, Melissa's scream cut short by a sharp, dry snap. The pain was beyond anything I could bear. With the taste of blood filling my mouth, my last thought was, this time, Caleb won. No witnesses, no one left to tell the truth. But then I heard Edward's voice, weak but clear. Catherine, don't move. Pretend you're dead. And I realized something miraculous. I was still alive. Agony burned through every inch of my body, but I forced myself to breathe shallowly, to stay completely still, just as he said. Not far away, I heard Caleb and Melissa groaning. They were alive too, but from their voices, I knew they were badly hurt. Melissa, are you okay? Caleb's voice trembled. I think. My leg's broken, Melissa moaned. It hurts so much, Caleb. What about the old folks? The way she said it made my stomach turn. To her, we had never been family, just obstacles in the way of money. I heard rustling. Caleb was crawling closer. My heart pounded so hard I feared he could hear it. They're dead, he said after what felt like hours of silence. They both had their eyes open, but they're not breathing. That lie lit a fragile spark of hope inside me. If he believed we were dead, we still had a chance to live. Perfect, Melissa whispered, her voice cold as ice. Everything went just as planned, except for us falling too. She gave a short, bitter laugh. At least now we don't have to pretend to love them anymore. The next few minutes stretched on like a century. Caleb and Melissa discussed how to get out. Both were injured, but they could still move. Their plan was clear. Crawl until they found cell signal, call for rescue, and create the perfect, miracle survival story. Two heartbroken children who had just lost their parents in a tragic hiking accident. Remember the story, Caleb told Melissa. We were taking pictures. Dad slipped, tried to grab Mom, and they both fell. We rushed to help and got pulled down too. Stick to that word for word. I remember, Melissa replied. We've practiced it 100 times already. We're the poor couple who lost their parents in a horrible accident. She was such a convincing actress that, if I didn't know the truth, even I might have believed her. Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled away in search of help. When silence returned, Edward whispered, his voice so faint I almost missed it. Catherine, are you alive? I answered softly. Still alive, but it hurts. My left leg's broken, he said, gasping from the pain. Maybe a few ribs too. What about you? We're badly hurt, but still breathing, I whispered. Do you still have your phone? Edward fumbled through his jacket pocket, trying not to make a sound. It's here, but the screen's cracked, not sure if it still works. After a few tense moments, he managed to turn it on. It's working, but there's no signal. The words chilled me to the bone. We had survived only to be trapped at the bottom of the canyon, gravely injured, with no way to reach anyone. If no one found us, we would die here from hunger, thirst, or our wounds. Just then, we heard voices echoing from afar. Caleb and Melissa had found help. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades filled the air. The rescue team was approaching. They were about to give the performance of their lives as the grieving, innocent survivors of a family tragedy. The moment of decision had come. We had only minutes to choose. Keep pretending to be dead and wait for the perfect chance, or risk being rescued alongside the very people who tried to kill us. Catherine, Edward whispered urgently. The phone recorded everything. We have Melissa's confession about the plan, and Caleb saying we're in their way. It's all here. But if they realize we're alive, they'll destroy the evidence before we can give it to the police. If Caleb and Melissa found out we were still alive, they would kill us right there, and this time, it wouldn't be an accident. It would be execution. We had to wait. We had to keep pretending. I found them, Caleb's voice shouted from above. "Please hurry, it's my parents." His voice trembled, dripping with fake grief. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it the voice of a desperate, heartbroken son. "Calm down, sir," another voice replied, firm and steady, probably the rescue team leader. "We'll come down to check. Can you and your wife move?" The sound of ropes and metal hooks echoed overhead. They were preparing to descend. Melissa wailed like a professional actress. "I can't believe this happened. We were just taking pictures. And then everything went so fast." A rock slipped, and they fell. Every word stabbed through my chest, because I knew those same lies would soon be repeated to the police, the reporters, and the entire world. The rescuers' footsteps and voices grew closer. Edward squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't move. Keep pretending." A man shouted, "Found them. 2 people down here." They approached and began checking our bodies. I shut my eyes tightly and kept my breathing shallow. I felt a rough hand on my neck. Then the man pressed his ear near my mouth, listening. "The man's got a pulse. It's weak," he said. "The woman, I'm not sure." "I need the medical team down here now," he called out, his tone urgent. My heart pounded. Everything was going exactly as we'd hoped. They believed Edward was barely alive, and I was as good as dead, no threat to anyone. The next few minutes stretched into eternity. The medics worked non-stop. I could feel them placing an oxygen mask over my face, checking my injuries, and securing me to a stretcher. Every nerve in my body screamed to open my eyes, to beg for help, but I fought that instinct I had to keep playing dead. "The man's stable but critical," I heard one of them say over the radio. "The woman's in severe condition. Her pulse is barely detectable. We need to get them to the hospital immediately." Perfect. They would take us to the hospital where we could tell the police without Caleb and Melissa silencing us first. As they lifted us out of the canyon, I heard Melissa sobbing and the rescuers offering kind words to those 2 murderers. "You 2 are so brave for surviving this," someone said. If only they knew the real miracle that Edward and I were still alive to tell the truth, they would never see those monsters as victims again. On the rescue helicopter, I could hear Edward breathing weakly beside me. The medics were working to keep him stable, and from their brief exchanges, I understood his condition was far worse than mine. For a fleeting moment, fear consumed me that he might die before he could tell the truth. "Ma'am," one medic said, "if you can hear me, keep breathing steadily. We're almost at the hospital." His voice was gentle and sincere, the kind of compassion I hadn't felt in my own family for a very long time. When we reached the hospital, everything turned into chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed through the halls, shouting medical terms I couldn't understand. I was wheeled straight into the emergency room. I still had to pretend to be unconscious, but at the same time, I needed to find a way to reach someone I could trust. "Doctor," a nurse whispered. "Her vitals are strange. Her heartbeat is much stronger than expected for her condition." My heart nearly stopped, they had noticed. My body was betraying me. The doctor murmured. "Sometimes, with severe trauma, the body reacts oddly in an effort to cling to life. Keep monitoring her closely." That explanation saved me, but it also made me realize I couldn't fake it forever. A few hours later, when the hospital had quieted down, I heard familiar voices in the hallway. Caleb and Melissa had arrived, ready to play the roles of grieving relatives. "How are they?" Caleb asked, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Are they alive?" The question made me sick. He was hoping the answer would be no. "The man is stable, but still critical," the doctor replied. "The woman, the next few hours will decide everything." Melissa let out a sob, the kind of sound meant to express sorrow, but to me it sounded more like relief. Can we see them for just a moment? Caleb asked. Just a few minutes. To say goodbye. If. The doctor agreed. I heard their footsteps approaching. This was the most dangerous moment. I had to convince my murderous son that I was truly dying. I felt Caleb's hand touch mine, cold and heavy. Mom, he whispered, if you can still hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened. His words sounded tender, but each one was dripping with poison. Melissa stepped closer, her trembling voice perfectly rehearsed. Dearest Catherine, you've been like a real mother to me. We'll never forget you. I wanted to sit up and scream in her face, liar. The only reason they'd never forget me. Then Caleb leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper cold as ice, freezing the blood in my veins. I hope you've learned your lesson. Some truths are better left buried, like John. In that instant, I knew our plan had worked. Caleb had just confessed, and even though I didn't have the phone recording, there was a nurse in the room. She'd heard everything. Her name tag read Maria Edwards. She stood frozen beside the monitor, her eyes wide with shock. She had just heard what no one was ever supposed to hear. In her eyes, I could see it. She understood every word of Caleb's meaning. She had just witnessed a murderer confess. What did you just say about John? Melissa whispered, clearly stunned. Caleb hesitated, realizing he'd slipped. Nothing, he stammered. Just, Mom always wondered what really happened that night. It doesn't matter anymore. But it did matter. And Melissa was smart enough to know her husband had just made a terrible mistake. Caleb, she said tensely, we should go. The doctor needs space to work. I could feel the stiffness in the air. They both knew they'd said too much, in the wrong place. When they left, Nurse Maria Edwards stepped closer to my bed. Ma'am? She whispered softly, her voice barely audible. I know you can hear me. What I just heard isn't normal. If you're in danger from those two people who just left, please find some way to let me know. Her voice carried urgency and compassion, and in that moment, I knew someone had finally started to suspect the truth. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my index finger. It was the smallest motion, but Maria Edwards noticed immediately. Oh my God, she whispered. She's faking unconsciousness. I moved my finger twice more, a sign of confirmation. All right, she said softly, stepping closer. I'll pretend to be checking the monitor. If you're really in danger because of those two people, move 3 times. Without hesitation, I did 3 times. She almost gasped, but caught herself just in time. My God, they did this to you, didn't they? I moved my finger 3 more times. Maria stepped back, pretending to check the IV bag while struggling to stay composed. I could see the conflict on her face, fear battling with duty. Finally, she leaned close and whispered, I'll tell the attending doctor, but you have to keep pretending until we can protect you, all right? I moved my finger once, understood. The next few minutes stretched on like an eternity. She believed me, and that she would act. At last, footsteps echoed in the hallway. She returned, accompanied by an older doctor and 2 police officers. Ma'am, the doctor said quietly, Nurse Maria Edwards has informed us of everything. If you can hear me, please know that you're safe now. The police are here to protect you. A wave of relief swept through me so strong that I nearly sat up for real. Can you open your eyes? One of the officers asked. Slowly, very slowly, I opened them. The white hospital light blinded me at first, but soon I could see the worried faces surrounding me. Thank God, Maria whispered. I was afraid I'd imagined everything. Ma'am, the officer said seriously, I'm Detective Richard Coleman. We understand you may be in extreme danger. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain? My voice was hoarse after hours of pretending to be comatose, but I managed to say, my son, and his wife. They pushed us off. The next few hours were a whirlwind of statements, recordings, and truth finally coming to light. I told Detective Coleman everything from John's death to Caleb's theft, his pressure to change our will, and the murder plot on the mountain in Colorado. But the most crucial piece of evidence was the recording on Edward's phone. Your husband has a recording? The detective asked, eyes lighting up. Yes, I said. Everything's in there, the confession, the plan, all of it. The detective immediately went to Edward's room, where he had just regained consciousness an hour earlier. When told about the situation, Edward handed over the phone, his voice weak but steady. It's all here. 25 years of lies, and the truth about what happened today. While the forensic team extracted the data, Caleb and Melissa sat in the waiting area, playing their roles as grieving children, accepting condolences from strangers. They had no idea their perfect act was about to end forever. The recording is clear, Detective Coleman announced after an hour. We have a direct confession to John's murder, evidence of financial fraud, and proof of a deliberate plot to kill their parents. That's more than enough for arrest. Will you arrest them here? I asked, my voice trembling. What if they find out we're alive? The detective nodded. We've already stationed officers around the building. As soon as the warrant is confirmed, they'll be taken into custody. In the meantime, you're both under full protection. I felt the bitter irony of it all. While Caleb and Melissa sat downstairs, pretending to grieve, accepting sympathy, planning our funeral, upstairs, the empire of lies they'd built for 25 years was collapsing. There's one more thing, Detective Coleman said, opening a thick file. After hearing your story, we ran a financial investigation on your son. Not only were your suspicions correct, he's on the brink of bankruptcy. He also owes money to some very dangerous loan sharks, people who don't accept excuses or broken promises. My blood ran cold. You mean, we weren't just a burden to him, were we? Detective Coleman nodded, his eyes darkening. No. You and your husband were his only lifeline. With your inheritance, he could pay off his debts and start over. Without you, he was as good as dead. That revelation left me speechless. My son, the one I had loved and protected, didn't just see us as obstacles, but as the last means of his own survival. Our deaths wouldn't just be convenient for him, they were necessary for him to stay alive. What about my grandchildren? I asked, my voice trembling at the thought of Caleb and Melissa's two innocent children. The social services team will take temporary custody of them, Detective Richard Coleman said gently. But once you and your husband recover, you can apply for guardianship. The thought of raising the children of the people who had tried to kill me made me dizzy, but it was also the only way to create something good out of this nightmare. Those children were innocent. They deserved to grow up in a home filled with real love, not the fake affection their parents had pretended to show. It's time, Detective Coleman said, as an officer entered the room, carrying a file. The arrest warrant has been signed. We're moving in now. Through the hospital window overlooking the parking lot, I saw officers quietly take their positions. The moment I had waited for over 25 years had finally come. Justice for John. Justice for us. And the end of the lies that had poisoned my family for decades. The arrest scene is something I'll never forget. From my hospital room, I watched the officers approach the waiting area where Caleb and Melissa were still pretending to be the heartbroken children. Detective Coleman turned on his radio so I could hear everything. Caleb Turner and Melissa Turner. A firm, cold voice announced, "You are under arrest for the murder of John Turner and the attempted murders of Catherine and Edward Turner." A deadly silence filled the room. followed by Melissa's hysterical scream. "What are you talking about? We're the victims. My in-laws died in an accident." "Ma'am," the officer replied calmly, "they're both alive and have provided full evidence of your crimes." For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence, then Caleb's voice broke through, filled with panic. "No, that's impossible. I saw them die. They were dead." That sentence, said in shock, became a full confession, and it was all recorded by the police. Through the radio, I heard Melissa start blaming him. "Forced me!" And Caleb shouted back wildly, "You're the one who suggested climbing the cliff. You planned it." In just minutes, their long-standing alliance, built over years of deceit, crumbled completely as each fought to save themselves. An hour later, Detective Coleman returned to my room, his expression a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. "Both are blaming each other, which only makes the case stronger," I asked, my heart ready to burst from so many shocks. "During the arrest, we found this in your son's backpack." He held up a small digital recorder. "He had secretly recorded your conversations with your husband over the past few weeks, probably to see if you were starting to suspect anything." My blood ran cold. "So, what do you mean?" The detective sighed. "It means he knew you two were starting to uncover the truth. The mountain trip was not spontaneous. It was a direct reaction to your suspicions. On one recording, you can clearly hear Melissa say, 'We have to act fast before they go to the police.' Their cruelty and cold calculation left me breathless. They hadn't just planned to kill us. They had been monitoring every conversation, measuring how much of a threat we posed to them. We were like mice in a maze, and they were the callous experimenters watching our every move." "And one more thing," Detective Coleman continued. "In our financial investigation, we found your son not only owes dangerous loan sharks, he's also been forging your signature on several documents to access the family's bank accounts. He would have had full access to your assets immediately." Each word hit me like a knife. The child I had given birth to not only wanted to kill me, but had been secretly taking our money for years, betraying every moral value I had tried to teach him. "How much did he take in total?" I asked, my voice shaking. "About $50,000 over the past 5 years, the detective answered. Small amounts that seemed unnoticeable, but added up to a large sum. The money Edward and I had saved our whole lives, every penny earned through hard work, had been spent by our son to fund a luxury lifestyle and a murder plot. The days that followed at the hospital were another whirlwind: interviews with police, dealing with our lawyer, and calls from the press. The story quickly became national breaking news, dubbed the most shocking family betrayal of the decade. The family betrayal that shook America. My sister Beatrice drove through the night from the next town to the hospital. When she saw me, she burst into sobs, holding me as if she feared I would vanish from her arms. "Catherine, oh my God," she kept repeating, crying and shaking, as if she still could not believe I was alive. I had always felt something was off about Caleb after John's death, but I never imagined he could do something so monstrous. Beatrice's words gave me some comfort. They confirmed that a mother's intuition like mine had not been wrong. "What about my grandchildren?" I asked, thinking of Caleb and Melissa's 2 innocent children who were now in social services temporary care. "I visited them yesterday," Beatrice said sadly. "They're confused, asking why their parents aren't home. They're too young to understand what happened." Our lawyer, Michael Grant, the man who helped prepare our will, came to see us with news about the case. "This is a very strong case," he reassured. "With the recordings, the confessions at arrest, and the financial evidence, it's almost impossible for them to escape conviction." Then he added something that made my blood run cold. "However, They are trying to negotiate guilty pleas in exchange for lighter sentences. They're arguing it was a crime of passion, not premeditated murder. A crime of passion? I burst out in outrage. They planned for weeks, bought equipment, picked the perfect location. How can that be passion? Mr. Grant nodded gravely. And we have clear evidence this was premeditated, but their lawyers will try to argue it was a desperate act driven by financial pressure. The thought that they might get reduced sentences made my blood boil. They killed John, tried to kill us, stole our savings for years, and now they wanted to be seen as victims of circumstance. What can we do to make sure they get the punishment they deserve? I asked. Your testimony, he said. Just your words, combined with the evidence, will help the jury see the true nature of this case. But I must warn you, facing your son in court will be painful. He was right. Just the thought of looking into Caleb's eyes, of hearing his lawyer defend the indefensible, was enough to make me feel suffocated. But I had to do it for John, for myself, and for my 2 grandchildren, who deserved to know the truth. 3 weeks after their arrest, Edward and I were discharged from the hospital. Our wounds had begun to heal, he still needed crutches, and I still wore a cast. The house looked strange and silent, like an abandoned stage after the play had ended. Everything was exactly as it had been the morning we left for that family outing. The dishes still in the sink, the bed unmade, and the flowers Caleb had brought that day still on the table, now wilted and dry. Time had stopped at the very moment our lives were torn apart. Do you think we can ever be happy again? I asked Edward that first night back home. He held me with his uninjured arm and I said, I don't know, Catherine, but at least we're alive. We have the truth. And after 25 years, we no longer have to live in lies. 6 months later, the trial began. On the day I testified, I looked Caleb straight in the eyes for the first time since his arrest. I felt no regret, no sorrow. The man before me was no longer my son, but a cold, calculating stranger who had pretended to be my child for decades. When my testimony ended, I looked him in the eyes and said, Caleb, I don't know who you are anymore, but you're not my son. My son died the night you killed John. What's been living in his place for the past 25 years is a monster I unknowingly raised. The jury took 3 days to deliver the verdict. Caleb was convicted of first-degree murder for John's death and first-degree attempted murder for plotting to kill me and Edward. Melissa received the same sentence as an accomplice. Both were given life in prison without parole. Now, 1 year later, Edward and I are finalizing the adoption of our 2 grandchildren. They are wonderful children, innocent, kind, and deserving of a home filled with real love, not the toxic, deceitful kind their parents once showed. Every night, when I tuck them into bed, I tell them about Uncle John, the brother they never got to meet. I tell them about his kindness, his dream of becoming an engineer, and the honesty and compassion he always carried in his heart. I want them to know that, in this family, light still exists even if their parents chose to walk in darkness. My story, Catherine's story, is a work of fiction inspired by true events, with names and locations changed to protect identities. But the emotions, the pain, and the struggle between silence and truth, forgiveness and confrontation, remain as real as those faced by countless mothers and wives out there. Maybe we've all stood at that crossroads at some point, and God sees it. He understands every silent tear. Today, I choose to speak not for revenge, but to find peace, to let light return to the places shadowed by darkness. I believe God blesses honest hearts, and that even from brokenness, He can bring renewal. Thank you for watching. Stay with me and choose one of the 2 videos on the screen. Each story is a reminder that faith is always stronger than fear.